Good morning and happy Father's Day. I apologize. We don't have bouquets of beef jerky as we did last year for all of you men. I got response back for your triglyceride levels, and they just said, please, no more Slim Jims. So no beef jerky. We're not going to stoop to the level of jerky this year, but we do want to say happy Father's Day to all you fathers in the house. And I'm glad you're here. I love that we have the district folks from all over the place coming into branches, parachuting in. I'm looking out and I'm seeing faces I haven't seen in a while. I love it. I love people that have been around and that are coming back around. It's amazing. Okay, we're still in John. We're all the way to John 9. And I'm gonna bracket this message with two different songs that will contrast each other in between them. Before I do that, and before I go into what songs we're talking about, let's start with this. Most of us, I would say, here don't believe in karma. Not the way that we believe in Jesus, right? But I do think that the karma system, the idea that the universe keeps a ledger and a score, that what goes around comes around, that suffering has a cause, that blessing has a formula associated with it, that always has an explanation, that has crept into our lives. Not just the folk religion of what goes around comes around, or you reap what you sow, or karma's the expression. The universe keeps score. I think that has found its way into our theology in some levels. And even if we'd never used the word karma, and we definitely wouldn't here on a Sunday morning, some of us may live as if we believe it. Thinking that if we're good enough, if we're careful enough, if we're faithful enough, if we pray hard enough, the karma police won't come for us. It might sound like today, even in this moment, the voice in your head that's running the math on whether your measurement and standing with God is enough. Measuring your performance, wondering if the hard thing right now that you're going through, the hard thing in your life is punishment for something that you've done or didn't do. That's the karma system. And it's not ancient history. It's not first century only. It may be in the room this week. And so I call this message, we can use our title slide here, Defund the Karma Police. I know it's needlessly provocative. I don't have an ulterior motive with this. I'm just being cheeky. But there is a song that captures this notion of karma, the spiritual ledger, the score that the universe is keeping, better than anything I know of, and it's called Karma Police by Radiohead.
Okay.
Take a look.
It's like a friend, it's like a addiction radio. Karma police, arresting this girl in my head. It's making me feel ill, we had a crash and party. This is what you get. This is what you get. This is what you get when you mess with us. Karma police, I'm giving all I can, it's not enough. I'm giving all I can, but we're still on the payroll. This is what you get. This is what you get. This is what you get when you mess with us.
So karma feels like from the inside, right? A car pressing towards you, relentless, patient, inevitable, coming for you because the ledger says it must bounce. But the formula doesn't work. You see what happens when it turns on itself and creates its own kind of destruction. And John 9 is a story about people walking inside that story. A crowd of people running this very system. The disciples, the Pharisees, the neighborhood, the parents, each of them in their own way, blind because of it. And so let's look at John 9 and see where this picks up in the story. Let's go ahead and read John 9:1. As he went along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" "Neither this man or his parents sinned," said Jesus, "but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. As long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I'm in the world, I am the light of the world." After saying this, he spit on the ground, made some mud with the saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. "Go," he told him. "Wash in the pool of Siloam." This word means sent. So the man went and washed and came home seeing. Scene 1, the disciples. Jesus has just been driven out in John 8 and is running from the crowd, pressing towards him, both to make him king and or to kill him, depending on which side you're on. And as he's leaving and running, what catches his eye is this blind man born from birth. The disciples see this man who's been blind his entire life. He was born this way, and their first move is a predictable one inside the spiritual accounting system, inside the karma system. They ask, who sinned? Who's to blame for this guy's blindness? Take note that this isn't a question about the problem of evil, of where did blindness come from. They presume to know. It's sin. Somebody sinned, this guy, but they hedge, right? And the hedge is to say, well, Maybe it was his parents and not him. But someone is to blame for this, right? They know the math, and to them, sin is the cause. And it makes perfect sense inside this kind of ledger logic, inside the spiritual karma system. Blindness is suffering. Suffering is punishment. Punishment requires an offense. And so somewhere in this man's story, or his parents, the ledger went out of balance. Find the sin and you found the explanation. This kind of theology always gives sin or suffering a cause. There's something comforting about that, right? If suffering always has a cause that I can point to, then the suffering is always theoretically somehow avoidable. Stay on the right side of the ledger and the car won't follow you. It's the illusion of control at the heart of all this. And the problem is, in this situation, is that this man was born blind. He never had a chance to sin his way into it, which is why the disciples hedged the bet and say maybe the parents were to blame for this. Maybe it wasn't him. Maybe it was somebody further upstream. The math has to work somewhere. But Jesus refuses this framework entirely. He says, neither this man nor his parents sinned. Neither. He doesn't redistribute the blame or find another place to put it on the ledger. He just says neither. Steps outside of the framework entirely. The man wasn't born blind because the ledger said so, but he was born blind, and the pivot that changes everything in our text is when he says, so that the works of God may be displayed in him. The karma system asks, what did this person do to deserve this? And Jesus is asking, what is God displaying here? What is God making here? What is being made and what is being displayed here? They're not the same question, and they don't produce the same world. And then he does something even more unexpected with the disciples. He spits on the ground, enough spit to make enough mud, to then gather the mud up in his hands and smear it on the blind man's eyes. Stay with that image. The earliest readers of this and the earliest first century Christians were making the connection immediately to, I bet you can guess, the hyperlink, the callback that he's moving back into is Genesis. They would have seen Genesis 2, the God who formed humanity from the dust with his hands. Same hands, same material. The word of God through whom all things were made is still making something. And it matters that the man was born blind. He never had sight to lose. The earliest church and the Christians, they didn't believe this was an act of restoration. His sight was not restored. It was created. His sight was not given back. It was made. He was given something he never had. This was an act of creation, not restoration. And then the sent man is sent by the man, Jesus, who is sent, to the pool of Siloam, which means the sent one. So the one sent by the Father, sending the man to the pool of the sent one, and the man goes and comes home. And mind you, as he's walking along, mud-smeared face, a good distance out to this pool of Siloam to wash, and Jesus and him, they're not together at this point, and the man at this point has no idea who this Jesus is. None. He doesn't have any idea. He's obviously never seen him, and he doesn't have the story, and Jesus is just bailing on another crowd pressing towards him and catches the attention of this man and comes up and spits on the ground and smears him after a conversation with the disciples, not the man, right? So here's a guy that's not a part of this conversation with the disciples. And the disciples are saying, is this blind guy at fault or his parents? And Jesus spits on the ground, walks up and smears mud in his face and tells him to wash. It's staggering that he goes, one, but he does and comes home. And he can see. That was a wild day. Scene 2, the Pharisees. So this guy comes back from the pool, and the neighbors, the town, they don't know what to do with him. So they bring the experts, Pharisees. What do we make of this? The neighborhood can't make anything of it. They can't figure it out. So they take him to the Pharisees, and they say, and let's read in verse 13 of John 9. They brought to the Pharisees the man who had been blind. Now the day on which Jesus had made the mud and opened the man's eyes was Sabbath. Shocker, right? Once again, Jesus does this work on Sabbath. Therefore, the Pharisees also asked him how he received his sight. So they're asking the now non-blind man, how did you get your sight? He just responds with, he put mud on my eyes, the man replied, and I washed, and now I see. Some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath. So now they're talking about Jesus, saying, the guy that healed you is not from God. Let's get that straight, because he does not keep the Sabbath. But others asked, well, then how can a sinner perform such signs? They're divided. They turn again to the blind man. What have you to say about him? It was your eyes he opened, after all. And the man replied, I can only guess with a kind of shrug, like, he's a prophet? Now, the Pharisees, they're not stupid people. The most theologically serious people in the room. They have spent their entire lives studying the law, learning the formula, knowing the math, knowing the system, and the system is clear. God blesses obedience and punishes sin. Good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people. The Sabbath is holy. Violating it is sin. Therefore, this guy who made mud and worked and violated the Sabbath is a sinner. Case closed. Therefore, he is not from God. That math adds up. And it was cross-referenceable. You could find it in the scriptures. I would imagine somebody would, instead of thumbing through the scriptures, unfurl a scroll of Levitical or Deuteronomical law to say, here it is. Let's just settle one thing. This guy's not from God. Chapter and verse. The problem is this living, breathing, now seeing man standing in front of them. A blind man, born blind, who now sees. And their system now has no category for it. There's nowhere to put that. It doesn't fit into the ledger, and it can't really happen. And sinners don't produce miracles. Therefore, the formula won't allow it. So they try a different approach. All right, this isn't working. They call the parents, summon them a second time. The interrogations continue. They press harder, and the more they press, the more the man pushes back. Let's read from verse 24. A second time, they summoned the man who'd been blind, saying, give glory to God by telling the truth. They said, we know this man's a sinner. He replied, whether he's a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I do know, I was blind, but now I see. And they asked him, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? And he answered, I've told you already, and you didn't listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too? Cheeky. They don't appreciate him getting cheeky with them on whether they want to follow the sinner very much, do they? And so then they hurl insults at him, and they say, you're this fellow's disciple. We're disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, but as for this fellow, we don't even know where he comes from. Translation, this bastard son from backwater Nazareth with irreputable birth from Nowheresville, yeah, we don't even know where this guy came from. The man answered, now that is remarkable. You don't know where he comes from, yet he opened my eyes. Again, translation, you seers of all of what God is doing in Israel, you with your thumb on the pulse of where Yahweh is up to, you don't know where he comes from, yet he opens my eyes. To this they replied, you are steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us? And they threw him out. Pharisees were good at one thing, it's driving people out. And they did. They threw him out. Do you see what happens when reality doesn't cooperate with theology? The Pharisees don't update their theology. They expel reality. And this is what the karma system does when it becomes certainty. It makes you blind to everything outside of your categories. And the Pharisees end this chapter way more confident than they even started. They have protected the system. And they have maintained the theology. And they cannot see the man standing in front of them who was born blind and now sees. This theology is not trapped in the first century. There is a consistent, not so subtle creep of this kind of certainty of the formula in our own lives, even in our churches. And it does go beyond that kind of karmic folk religion that I talked about. Everything happens for a reason. There are things that we say and we just kind of live as if it's got a truth to it. What goes around comes around. You guys have said that. Everything happens for a reason. Theological certainty and karma show up in the church. Anytime we see certainty, blame, and control rear their ugly heads. Where? Well, it looks like this about the prosperity gospel. That formula is clear. Faith plus obedience plus tithing equals blessing. Sickness means weak faith. Financial struggle means hidden sin. This is the karma system with a big smile and a stadium. It's the suffering person who's always suspect. Their condition is always somehow their fault. Where else does it show up? Shows up in conservative evangelical culture. Can we call a spade a spade? This culture says we believe the right things about the Bible, about theology, about politics, about sexuality, about marriage. The list goes on and on. Thus, God is on my side. This formula is doctrinal and requires total moral conformity. And inside that formula, anyone outside of the camp isn't just wrong, they're on the wrong side of God. This could be your gay son, your doubting daughter, the secret Democrat in the pew. These outsiders don't just disagree with evangelicalism, they've failed the ledger, which means they could be discarded, dismissed. And whatever Jesus might be doing in their life is totally disregarded, as it doesn't matter, because the theology has already issued a verdict. And when catastrophe strikes, a September 11th or a Hurricane Katrina or an earthquake that kills thousands or an AIDS crisis or whatever it is, this version of the spiritual ledger system produces a very predictable reflex. Somebody grabs a microphone, often somebody who looks like me. Usually the conservative evangelicals, and tells you exactly whose sin caused it, who's to blame. Jerry Falwell blamed 9/11 on the ACLU, feminists, gay people. Pat Robertson linked Katrina to abortion. The AIDS crisis was preached from pulpits across America as God's judgment on homosexuality. While people were dying in hospital beds because visitors were afraid to show up for fear of what it might mean to demonstrate mercy. This is the karma system at its most public and most cruel. The ledger must balance and suffering must have a cause, and the cause is always, conveniently, the people on the wrong side. The Pharisees, in our story here, they threw out the evidence, right? Just disregard that this man was blind and now sees. But this version in conservative culture, this version throws out the person and then holds a press conference about it. Now, I wish there wasn't another side of the coin, but there is. This shows up in progressive religious culture as well. This theology says we've deconstructed the harmful theology. We've moved past the naive faith of our fathers. We know the right language. We avoid all the triggers, and we're on the right side of history now. This one is subtle, but it deserves an honest look, because deconstruction of harmful theology is very necessary. Pulling apart theology that causes real harm and violence is very important work. But here's what happens when the deconstruction becomes its own closed system. The ledger doesn't disappear. It just gets new categories. The formula now becomes, how far along are you? Have you done the work? Do you use the right language? Have you arrived at correct conclusions? Are you now on my team? The team that God's on, obviously. And suddenly the system that was supposed to free people from harm is issuing its own new judgments on the other side of the ledger. So the person still holding a differing conservative view isn't just wrong, they're harmful. The one who hasn't completed the journey isn't just behind, they're suspect. Whatever Jesus might be doing in a more conservative person's life gets dismissed as not real because the new theology already decided God cannot be working there. It's still a ledger. It's just changed from doctrinal conformity to ideological evolution. Good things like platforms, belonging, credibility, visibility, that happens to the approved progressive people, and silence, dismissal, and suspicion happen to the people who haven't caught up yet. The spiritual ledger doesn't care which direction you run it. It just needs a formula and a ledger with an instinct to blame, an instinct to say who's right and who's wrong. But Jesus just rejects that framework. And the theology of John 9 isn't about a man who's done enough theological navel-gazing and book reading, the inner work of inner healing. It's about a guy who received something he could have never produced on his own and that he never had. He could have never given himself sight, and he never had it to begin with, and then spends the rest of the chapter giving witness to anyone who would listen. So the disciples and the Pharisees asked, who's to blame? And Jesus asks, who needs mercy? Who needs mercy? They're different questions, and they produce very different people. It seems Jesus is drawn to the humble and needy and very opposed to the proud and certain. And there's a difference between certainty and faith, a world of difference. It's worth naming. Certainty is a closed system. The formula is settled. Whatever arrives gets rejected, gets dismissed. Certainty feels like strength, doesn't it? Like conviction. We use those words like, I want to be a man of conviction. But in this story, it's blindness and darkness. It's the opposite of light and sight. Faith is different. Faith says, I don't have everything figured out, but I know who I'm following. And that's enough. The blind man has faith and trust, but not in a system or in a theology, but in a person. He doesn't have all the answers. He may not have any answer. He may have none of the answers other than he keeps saying, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. He keeps getting pressed, and his answer is, I don't know, I don't know. But he holds the one thing he has and refuses to let the pressure have him release that. The Pharisees have certainty, the man has faith. The Pharisee leaves them blind and in the dark. And this man's faith leads him to worship. Verse 38 says, then the man said, Lord, I believe, and he worshiped him. So how do you know if your certainty has become blindness? How do you know if you're self-deceived? How do you know? You don't. That's what makes it self-deception. Which is why it requires honest relationship in community with people and a God who are allowed to offer a counter perspective. This is not weakness. It's the only way to stay open. It's the path towards light and sight. What do you want more, certainty or faith? That's a hard question. Harder than it sounds, right? Because, man, do I love basking in the warm glow of certainty. I'm certain, and I feel good about it. But I think our prayers, more often than not, are away from faith and towards certainty. If I could just be more certain, everything would be better. And it seems Jesus is saying that math doesn't add up. You don't need more certainty, but you do need faith. The last scene, the blind man. I think it's interesting that the Bibles have the subcategory of the blind beggar, when what's really his identity the rest of his life is the seeing man. But then there's the blind man. Jesus doesn't ask who sinned, doesn't consult the ledger, doesn't calculate what he deserves. He just spits in the dirt and makes mud with his hands and creates something, vision. And so this man who has no framework, like I said, for what just happened, and he doesn't know who Jesus is, and he doesn't know what the mud means, and he doesn't know about even the callback to Genesis. He doesn't know his sight's about to be created. He doesn't even know what sight is because he's never had it. He's never seen anything. He just goes. And he comes home seeing, and what follows are several interrogations. From the man's perspective, he's interrogated by the neighbors and the Pharisees and the parents, and the Pharisees again. I think 5 in total interrogations for this seeing man of what just happened. And each one's pressing him to recant, to minimize, to find the category for it, right? Help us be more comfortable with what God's doing if you just help us put it into a category here that we're comfortable with. That's what the neighbors want, and the Pharisees, and the parents. Everybody involved would just like to be a lot more comfortable if they could make more sense of this. But he doesn't give it to them. He says, I was blind, now I see. That's his entire theology. His whole argument, his whole not sophisticated, not systematic theology, but it's irrefutable because it's his. And no formula takes that from him. And the Pharisees throw him out. And it's costly. He loses the synagogue, his community, his neighbors, his belonging. The throwing out was an expulsion of everything that was part of his rhythms. The religious standing he never had to begin with because he would have been seen as somebody suspect because of his blindness. So he's out now of the community on the street with nothing but the sight that he didn't earn and a testimony that he can't explain. Dang. And then all of this happening away from Jesus, the interrogation and the pressing and the kicking out and the driving out and the category making that they're all doing with this man, it's all happening in another space. And so some other time in verse 35, it says, Jesus heard they had thrown him out. So word gets round. Jesus had heard, hey, Jesus, not for nothing, but that guy that you healed, man, they kicked him out to the wilderness. I can imagine Jesus responding, saying, really? It says, and when he found him, so obviously he goes looking. They tell Jesus about it. He goes, I got to find him. So he goes. And he finds him. Not in synagogue, not in the neighborhood, not with his parents, not with the Pharisees, probably alone. And he just asks him, do you believe in the Son of Man? Do you believe in the messianic coming of God on earth? Do you believe in Jesus? And he says, who is he, sir? Remember, this man has no idea who he's talking to. He's never seen him before. The man asked, tell me so that I can believe in him. All right. Who is it then? Tell me. And Jesus says, you're looking at him. You have now seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking with you. Then the man said, Lord, I believe. And he worshiped him. Jesus heard that they'd thrown him out. And when he found him, and when he went looking for the man that the system had discarded and the people had discarded and the evidence was discarded, this is what the gospel does and karma cannot. Karma pursues you with what you owe, and grace pursues you with what you need. Mercy. The car in our Radiohead video is pressing forward, inevitable, relentless, coming for you because the ledger says it must. But Jesus is pursuing an inevitable and coming for you because he will not leave you in the dark. The light has come. Open your eyes. Whether your eyes are closed or not changes your interaction with the light, but the light is there. You may not be seeing it because you are keeping your eyes closed, but it's there. It's no longer dark. And that man found by Jesus responds with, Lord, I believe, and he worshiped. That's the whole arc. A man born outside of the system, given something the system said was impossible, thrown out for refusing to pretend that it didn't happen, and then found again by the one who gave it to him in the first place. That's the arc. That's the gospel. Karma says you get what you deserve. And the gospel says you get what you never could earn or make on your own, given freely by the one who made you and is not finished with you. Jesus doesn't balance the ledger, doesn't balance the scales. He tears it up. So which system are you living inside? It's entirely possible to say you believe in grace and still live in the karma system, the system of formula and certainty and blindness. You can intellectually affirm that Jesus tears up the ledger while emotionally running the math every day, measuring your standing with God against your performance, interpreting suffering as punishment, staying silent about what you've experienced because the formula says it costs too much. Scott, Pete, Kirsten, come on up as I close down. Remember, we're comparing two songs. The second song, 250 years before Radiohead's Karma Police, a man named John Newton wrote a song. Newton knew the karma system, knew it from the inside. He'd run the ledger his whole life, and the ledger says he was guilty. He was a slave trader. He transported human beings across the Atlantic in conditions so brutal that most didn't survive even the crossing. And he knew what he deserved. And then in 1748, a wild storm on the North Atlantic and the ship taking on water, and he's tying himself to the mast. He cries out to God for the first time in his adult life that he'd survive the storm. And he does. And something began in him that the ledger had no category for, this very slow, disorienting, years-long encounter with grace that eventually led him out of the slave trade and into church. And finally to a desk where the only way he could describe what had happened to him on that night on the boat was to sit down and write a song. The song is Amazing Grace. How sweet the sound. Saved a wretch like me. I was once lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. A man born blind in John 9 never wrote a hymn, but he lived one. And Karma Police is a song about a system that hunts you down. And Amazing Grace is a song about a God who finds you when you're lost. Both songs are about being found, but only one is good news. So whatever the system has said about you, whatever the verdict, the formula, or the culture has produced, whatever it has cost you to be honest about what's happened to you and what you've experienced, you're not outside the reach of the one who went looking for the man thrown out. And so for the lost today, for those who feel like I can't see, Jesus' question for you is, do you believe? And for those found today, all I can tell you, all I know, is I was blind, but now I see. Let's sing. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound.